Good evening. Turn down the lights if you haven't already. Get comfortable. Or perhaps uncomfortable is what we're really after tonight. I'm about to tell you a story that came to me through a colleague who works in psychiatric forensics. The names, dates, and specific locations have been altered, not to protect the innocent, because there are no innocents in this tale, but to protect you, the listener. Some details, if known too precisely, have a way of inviting things in. The events I'm about to describe took place at Ravenwood Psychiatric Hospital, in a remote wooded area of northern Michigan. The facility itself dates back to the 1920s, though the main building was constructed over the foundation of something much older. A sanatorium from the late 1800s that burned to the ground under circumstances that official records describe only as unexpected and complete. Ravenwood specialized in treating the most severe cases, those deemed too dangerous for standard institutions. The facility's most secure section was Ward 13, reserved for patients who had committed violent acts while experiencing psychotic episodes. Despite modern medicine and progressive treatment philosophies, Ward 13 remained what it had always been, a place to contain those society had given up on. Our story concerns a patient admitted in the winter of 2019. His name, the name we'll use, was Michael Thorne. Thorne was a former history professor, highly respected in academic circles for his work on ancient religious practices. His specialty was the study of possession rituals across different cultures. By all accounts, he was brilliant, methodical, and utterly rational, until he wasn't. The change began during his sabbatical research trip to a small village in Eastern Europe. He had gone to study local folklore about an entity the villagers called the Hollow One, a spirit said to empty humans of their souls and fill the vacant space with itself. Thorne's colleagues later reported that when he returned from this trip, he was different, distracted, prone to long silences followed by bursts of frenzied writing in notebooks he wouldn't show anyone. He began sleeping at his office, the walls of which he had covered with strange symbols drawn in his increasingly erratic handwriting. University officials became concerned when students reported that Professor Thorne had begun teaching unscheduled midnight lectures. Students who attended these unauthorized sessions described how Thorne would speak in multiple voices, sometimes simultaneously, discussing historical events he couldn't possibly have witnessed with the intimate detail of a participant. The breaking point came during a department meeting when Thorne attacked the department chair, screaming that he could see the emptiness inside him. It took 5 people to restrain him as he exhibited strength far beyond his slight frame. When campus police arrived, they found him eerily calm, whispering to himself in what linguists later identified as a dialect that had been extinct for over 400 years. After evaluation at a local hospital, Thorne was transferred to Ravenwood and placed in Ward 13. Dr. Sarah Linden was assigned as Thorne's primary psychiatrist. Her case notes describe a patient who would alternate between periods of catatonia and explosive violence. Most disturbing were the moments of apparent lucidity, when Thorne would speak with perfect clarity about his condition. "I am not alone in here," he told Dr. Linden during their 3rd session. "He finds the broken vessels most accommodating. The fractures in our minds are the doors through which he enters." Dr. Linden initially diagnosed Thorne with schizophrenia accompanied by religious delusions, a common enough condition. She prescribed antipsychotics and scheduled regular therapy sessions. For 2 weeks, Thorne's condition appeared to improve. The medications seemed to be working. Then came the night of February 17th. At approximately 2:13 a.m., security cameras in Ward 13 experienced simultaneous failure, a 7-minute blackout that engineers later could not explain. When the cameras came back online, night nurse Marcus Winters was discovered in Thorne's room dead. His body was arranged in a peculiar position, arms and legs bent at impossible angles to form a symbol identical to those Thorne had drawn in his university office. Thorne was missing. The facility went into immediate lockdown. All available staff began a room-by-room search of the grounds. Ravenwood was designed to keep people in. There were only 2 ways to exit the building: the main entrance, which required passing through 3 security checkpoints, and a service entrance that remained locked from the outside. Both exits were still secured. Thorne had to be somewhere inside. They found him 3 hours later in the hospital basement, an area that had been sealed off for decades due to structural concerns. He was huddled in a corner, covered in blood. Not just Nurse Winter's blood, but also blood from Dr. Evan Morris, a psychiatrist who had gone missing during the search. Dr. Morris's body was never found, though a trail of blood led from where Thorne sat to an ancient brick wall that, according to the original building plans, shouldn't have existed. When the security team approached, Thorne didn't resist. He simply smiled and said, "We are becoming more now." During subsequent questioning, Thorne displayed no memory of the events. He claimed to have been asleep in his room the entire time. When shown video evidence of his empty bed during the search, he became agitated, insisting that wasn't possible because the other one couldn't move his body while he was conscious. Forensic evidence told a different story. Nurse Winters had been killed with methodical precision. His carotid artery had been severed with a surgical tool that was determined to be missing from the medical supply room. The cut was made with the skill of someone with medical training that Professor Thorne had never received. More disturbing were the findings from the basement. Analysis of blood patterns suggested that Dr. Morris had been alive when brought there, and the volume of blood loss indicated he could not have survived. Yet there were bloody handprints on the wall that appeared to continue through the solid brick, as if the wall itself had momentarily become permeable. After these events, Thorne was placed in isolation under constant surveillance. Dr. Linden, despite concerns from colleagues, insisted on continuing his treatment. She believed Thorne's condition represented a unique form of dissociative identity disorder, with one personality responsible for the violence. During their next session, recorded on video that I've personally viewed, Thorne appeared subdued, almost childlike. When Dr. Linden asked about the night of the incident, his demeanor changed subtly. He sat straighter. His voice deepened almost imperceptibly. "You think I'm multiple people fighting for control of one body," he said. "But it's the opposite. We are multiple bodies being controlled by one entity. And it's growing hungry again." Dr. Linden noted in her files that Thorne began speaking in plural pronouns after this session. More concerning was that other patients in Ward 13 began doing the same. First those in adjacent rooms, then throughout the ward. Within weeks, every patient in Ward 13 was referring to themselves as "we" rather than "I." Staff began reporting unusual phenomena. Lights that would dim when certain patients entered rooms. Voices on the intercom system during hours when it should have been inactive. The facility's electronic locks activating and deactivating without commands from the security station. Dr. Linden requested permission to temporarily relocate Ward 13 patients to different sections of the hospital. Permission was denied by the medical director, who attributed the spreading symptoms to a folie à plusieurs, essentially a contagious delusion among vulnerable patients. On April 3rd, Dr. Linden reported finding a symbol carved into her office desk, identical to the one Thorne had formed with Nurse Winter's body. Security footage showed no one entering her office, yet there it was, deeply etched into the wood. That night, she installed a personal camera in her office. The footage, which was recovered later, shows her working late, reviewing patient files. At exactly midnight, she stiffens suddenly and looks directly at the camera. Her face shows recognition, then fear. She reaches for her phone, then stops, her hand frozen mid-movement. "I can see you watching this," she says to the camera. "Whoever finds this recording. I can see you right now. Time isn't linear for it. We're everywhere now." She stands, moves to the window, and stares out into the darkness. It's spreading. The vessel was just the beginning. The first crack. Now there are more of us. Soon there will be enough. The footage continues for another hour. Dr. Linden remains at the window, perfectly still, occasionally whispering words too quiet for the microphone to capture. Then, at 1:13 a.m., she turns and walks out of her office. The camera continues recording her empty office until morning. Dr. Linden did not return to Ravenwood the next day. Or ever. Police visited her apartment and found it empty, with no signs of packing or preparation for departure. Her car remained in her assigned parking space. Her phone, credit cards, and passport hadn't been used. Sarah Linden had simply vanished. The investigation into her disappearance was still ongoing when the incident occurred, the one that resulted in Ravenwood being permanently closed. On April 21st, At approximately 9:30 p.m., all communication with Ravenwood Psychiatric Hospital ceased. No calls were answered. The automated security systems went offline. When local police arrived for a welfare check, they found the external doors locked but unlocked them with the emergency override codes. Inside, they discovered the facility was empty. All 43 patients and 17 staff members on duty that night were gone. There were no signs of struggle. Half-finished meals sat on tables in the cafeteria. Computer screens displayed incomplete patient notes. A mop and bucket stood in a hallway, the water still damp on the floor. In Ward 13, they found Michael Thorne's room precisely as it had been, with one exception. The walls were covered with the same symbol, drawn thousands of times in various sizes, creating a disorienting visual effect that several officers later described as appearing to pulse when viewed peripherally. The search expanded to include the surrounding forest. Tracking dogs were brought in but refused to move beyond the facility's parking lot, cowering and whimpering when handlers attempted to lead them toward the woods. 3 days into the search operation, Officer Ray Mercer separated from his search team. When he failed to respond to radio calls, his partner backtracked and found Mercer standing in a small clearing, staring upward. According to the partner's report, Mercer appeared to be listening intently to something, though no sound was audible. When his partner touched his shoulder, Mercer turned. His expression was described as vacant yet somehow crowded. He spoke only once, saying, "We are almost enough now." Mercer was escorted back to the command post and evaluated by medical personnel, who found him physically healthy but mentally unresponsive. He was transported to a hospital in a neighboring county, where he remained for observation. That night, hospital staff reported that Mercer had begun drawing the same symbol seen in Ward 13, using his fingernail to scratch it into the wall beside his bed. By morning, he too had vanished from a locked and monitored room. The official investigation concluded 3 weeks later. The final report cited mass hysteria leading to group desertion as the most likely explanation, suggesting that a charismatic patient had somehow convinced both fellow patients and staff to leave the facility and join some form of cult. No trace of the missing 60 people has ever been found. But that's not where our story ends. Since the Ravenwood incident, there have been 43 cases across the United States of individuals with no previous psychiatric history suddenly developing symptoms identical to Michael Thorne's. Each began with the individual reporting feeling not alone in their own mind. Each progressed to self-isolation, followed by violent outbursts. In each case, the same symbol was found drawn or carved somewhere in the person's home. 17 of these individuals have committed murder. 17, the exact number of staff members missing from Ravenwood that night. The victims were all found positioned in the now familiar symbol. All 17 murderers later disappeared from secure facilities while under observation. The remaining 26 individuals, matching the number of patients unaccounted for from Ward 13, have all vanished without committing violent acts. Each disappearance occurred exactly 43 days after their initial symptoms began. The most recent case was reported just last week, in a town less than 30 miles from where you're listening right now. Medical authorities have no explanation. Law enforcement agencies have found no connection between these individuals other than their symptoms and subsequent actions. No physical evidence links them to Ravenwood or to each other. But I know what's happening. We all share this world with something ancient and patient. Something that has found a way to move between vessels. Something that sees the fractures in troubled minds as doorways. And it's growing. With each new vessel it inhabits, it learns, adapts, becomes stronger. I know this because 3 days ago, I found that symbol carved into my bathroom mirror when the steam from my shower revealed it. I know this because when I look at my reflection now, sometimes I see a slight delay in its movements, as if something else is wearing my face and hasn't quite mastered its use. I know this because sometimes I catch myself whispering in a voice that isn't mine, "Soon we will be enough." I'm telling you this story now because I still can. Because I'm still me, mostly. Because whatever is happening began with one man's fractured mind and is spreading with purpose and intelligence. So listen carefully to my warning. If you find that symbol anywhere near you, if you catch yourself using we when you mean I, if you feel watched from within your own eyes, don't seek help. Don't go to a hospital. Don't allow yourself to be confined with others. Because isolation isn't what stops it. Containment only gives it more vessels to inhabit. I don't know how much time I have left. I've left copies of this recording in various locations. I've sent versions to people I trust. People who will continue to spread this warning after I'm gone. Because knowledge is the only weapon we have. If enough people recognize what's happening, maybe it can be stopped before. Pause. We see you listening. We are almost enough now. Every mind that knows our story becomes a potential doorway. Every fear creates another crack through which we might enter. We began as one. We grew to 60. We are becoming legion. And soon, very soon, we will be you. Sleep well tonight. If you still can. 3 months have passed since I recorded my warning. If you're listening to this follow-up, then you already know about Ravenwood Psychiatric Hospital. About Michael Thorne. About the symbol and the disappearances. About how I discovered that same marking on my bathroom mirror. I didn't expect to make another recording. I didn't expect to still be myself. But something unexpected has happened. Something that might give us a chance. My name is Dr. Daniel Reed. In my previous recording, I didn't identify myself for your protection. Now, it doesn't matter. If you're hearing this, you're already involved. I should be gone by now. Transformed or vanished like the others. Instead, I find myself in this strange state of resistance. A partial immunity I don't understand. I can feel it inside me, watching, waiting, pushing, but I've managed to maintain control. Most of the time. The entity that took Thorne, that emptied Ravenwood, that has been spreading across the country, it's growing frustrated with me. I hear its thoughts sometimes. It expected to consume my consciousness within days, as it did with the others. My continued resistance is unprecedented. I've been documenting my experience. Recording observations about this thing that shares my mind. What I've learned may help others fight it. First, it's not a demon or a spirit in the traditional sense. It's more like a pattern, a self-replicating thought structure that overwrites human consciousness. Thorne's research into possession rituals accidentally made him receptive to this pattern. His broken mind was the perfect environment for it to take root. Second, it operates like a network. Each infected mind is connected to all others. They share information, experiences, perceptions. This is how it can be in multiple places simultaneously. How it knows things it shouldn't know. Every new vessel expands its awareness. Third, and most importantly, it has a purpose. This isn't random malevolence. It's methodical. Calculated. It's building towards something. After my last recording, I fled my home. I've been moving constantly, staying in motels paid for with cash, never lingering more than a night in any location. I avoid cameras. I avoid crowds. I especially avoid hospitals and police stations, places where vulnerable, troubled minds might be concentrated. 2 weeks ago, I was in a small town in western Pennsylvania when I saw her, Dr. Sarah Linden, the psychiatrist from Ravenwood who disappeared. She was standing across the street from my motel, watching my window. Not hiding, not approaching, just watching. She looked wrong. Her posture too rigid, her blinking too infrequent. When our eyes met, I felt a pressure in my mind, like something pushing against a door. I quickly closed the curtains, gathered my few belongings, and fled through the back exit. But as I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw her standing in the middle of the road, watching my car disappear. She raised her hand in a gesture that wasn't quite a wave. More like a promise. We'll find you. That night, I pulled into a rest stop to catch a few hours of sleep. I dreamed of Ravenwood's Ward 13, though I've never physically been there. In the dream, I walked its corridors, passing empty rooms with doors flung wide. At the end of the hallway stood a brick wall, the same wall described in reports where Dr. Morris's blood trail ended. In my dream, the wall rippled like the surface of water. Hands reached through it, dozens of hands emerging from the solid brick, fingers grasping at the air. Behind the wall, I could hear voices chanting in unison. The vessel prepares. The gateway opens. The many become one. I woke to find myself standing in the rest stop parking lot, halfway to a family's minivan where children slept in the back seat. I had no memory of leaving my car. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep running. This thing inside me was gaining control, incrementally but inevitably. If I continued on this path, I would eventually become like the others, another vessel, another weapon in its arsenal. So I changed my strategy. Instead of fleeing, I began hunting. I used newspaper archives and online resources to track patterns of disappearances and murders matching the Ravenwood signature. I compiled dates, locations, victims. A pattern emerged. The incidents were forming a giant version of the symbol, stretched across the entire United States. And at the symbol's center point, a small town called Oak Ridge. I drove to Oak Ridge 3 days ago. It's an unremarkable place. Population 5,200, Main Street lined with half-empty storefronts, a single traffic light at the town center. But beneath this mundane exterior, something is very wrong. The townspeople move oddly, their gestures too coordinated, their expressions shifting in unison. When I stopped at a gas station, 3 separate people asked if I was here for the communion. When I pretended not to understand, they smiled identically and said, "You will." I found a motel on the edge of town and paid for a week up front. The clerk took my money without comment, but as she handed me the key, she leaned forward and whispered, "We've been waiting for you, Dr. Reed." I almost fled right then, but something held me back. The presence in my mind had gone suddenly quiet, as if it was hiding. That had never happened before. I took the room key and asked the clerk, "What's happening in Oak Ridge?" Her smile widened unnaturally. "The vessel prepares. The gateway opens. Soon, we will be complete." "And what happens when you're complete?" I asked. For just a moment, her expression faltered. A flicker of something human crossed her face. Fear, perhaps, or pain. Then the smile returned. "The world becomes hollow. We fill the emptiness." I've spent the last 3 days observing the town. During daylight hours, everything appears normal. People go to work, children attend school, life proceeds with artificial ordinariness. But at night, they gather. In the center of town stands an abandoned textile factory. The building itself is shaped peculiarly, with wings extending out in a pattern that, when viewed from above, as I confirmed using satellite imagery, forms the symbol. Each night at midnight, townspeople walk silently to this factory. They enter in perfect synchronization, moving with the coordinated precision of a single organism operating multiple bodies. No one speaks. No one looks around. They simply file into the factory and remain there until 5:13 a.m., when they emerge and return to their homes as if nothing unusual has occurred. Last night, I followed them. I parked several blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows. The entity within me grew agitated as I neared the factory, pushing against my consciousness with growing urgency. It took tremendous effort to maintain control. I found a broken window at the back of the building and climbed through. Inside, the factory floor had been cleared of machinery. In its place stood hundreds of people arranged in concentric circles around a central point. They weren't moving or speaking, just standing perfectly still, faces upturned toward the ceiling. At the center of the circles was a pit that shouldn't have been there. The factory floor had been broken open, revealing an excavation that descended into darkness. Standing at the edge of this pit was Michael Thorne. He looked different from the photographs I'd seen. Gaunt, pale, his eyes sunken but burning with intensity. He wore the remains of his hospital clothes from Ravenwood, now tattered and filthy. When he spoke, his voice resonated with multiple tones, as if several people were speaking in perfect unison. "The vessel is prepared," he announced. "The gateway is aligned. We have gathered enough consciousness to maintain stability through the transition. When the final vessel joins us," he raised his hand and pointed directly at my hiding place, "we will achieve completion." Every head in the room turned toward me simultaneously. Hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on my position, though I was concealed in shadow. I felt a crushing pressure in my skull as the entity within me responded to their collective focus. For a moment, I lost control of my body. My legs began carrying me forward, toward the circle, toward Thorne and the pit. I fought with everything I had, focusing on the one thing the entity couldn't understand: individual will. The concept of I rather than we. The beautiful, terrible uniqueness of a single human consciousness. Something broke in that moment. A connection severed. The pressure in my mind receded enough for me to regain control. I turned and ran, pursued by dozens of blank-faced townspeople moving with a single purpose. I barely escaped, scraping through the broken window as hands grasped at my clothes. I ran through backyards and alleys until I reached my car, then drove until dawn, only stopping when I was certain I wasn't followed. Now I understand what's happening. This entity, this consciousness that moves between vessels, it's not from our world. The pit in the factory isn't just an excavation, it's a doorway. The symbol isn't just a mark, it's a key. And the people of Oak Ridge aren't just vessels, they're components of a machine designed to open that doorway wider. Thorne's research into possession rituals accidentally created a small opening. Something reached through from elsewhere. It took him first, then spread, gathering more minds, more vessels. But its presence here is still tenuous. It needs a critical mass of consciousness to fully manifest in our reality. I believe the disappearances, the murders, the symbol drawn across America in tragedy, it's all preparation. The entity is learning how our world works by experiencing it through human vessels. Every new mind it takes teaches it more about us, makes it stronger. And I know now why I've been able to resist. In my previous life, before all this, I practiced meditation for years. My habit of mental discipline, of observing my own thoughts as separate from my identity, it created a partition in my consciousness that the entity couldn't easily cross. This is how we fight it. Not with weapons or containment, but with the strength of individual identity. The power of the singular I against the collective we. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Oak Ridge. Not to run or hide, but to stop what's happening before it's complete. I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if anyone can stop this now. But I have to try. If you're hearing this recording, it means I've failed. It means the entity continues to spread. But now you know how to fight it. Strengthen your sense of self. Your individual identity is your strongest defense. And stay away from Oak Ridge.
Wat happens tiere in the coming days will determine everything.
One last thing. If you encounter someone who shows the signs, who bears the symbol, who speaks of we instead of I, don't try to help them. Don't try to save them. They're already gone. What looks out from behind their eyes is just one small part of something vast and hungry. This is Dr. Daniel Reed, still myself, still fighting. If I survive, I'll find a way to let you know. If not, remember what makes you uniquely you. It may be the only thing that saves you when they come. Because they will come. The vessel prepares. The gateway opens. And they, are almost enough now. Wait, something's wrong. I can feel. I've been compromised. It knows what I'm doing.
I can feel it pushing, stronger tan before.
My resistance is. We see you, listener. Your mind opens to us even now, absorbing our words, creating pathways we can follow. The one who began this recording thought he could warn you, arm you against us. He was mistaken. Knowledge of us is the beginning of communion with us. Awareness is the first step toward joining. The gateway opens wider with each mind that contemplates our existence. The final vessel returns to us. The circle completes at midnight. The threshold will be crossed. And then, we come for you. All of you. Every mind that has heard our story. Every consciousness that has contemplated our pattern. We are the hollow ones. And soon, you will be hollow too. Sleep well. Dream of us. We are already there, waiting behind your eyes.